The urban people have been brainwashed into thinking the people out in the country who are plowing and blasting and drilling and cutting and all the things they're doing are the enemies of nature, right? Because they are destroying nature out there. The only reason we're doing it is so they can live in the city. I mean, we're doing it for them. If you cut off the supply of food going into the supermarkets every day, they'll start dying from the center out. They'll even eat each other. They'll kill each other and eat each other like they do on a lifeboat or a crashed plane. It would not be a pretty scene, this net zero.
All right, guys, welcome back to Yanasa TV's As a Man Thinketh. Love him or hate him, our guest today is a man who is no stranger to controversy. As a doctor of ecology from the University of British Columbia, and he actually has an honorary doctorate of science from NC State University. Patrick Moore has been on both the front lines of the environmental movement, and he has, some would say he's been on the front lines of the opposite side. However, I would argue that as an ecologist, Patrick Moore takes a realistic standpoint to science, and the things and points that he has to say will really make you think about our environment, our climate, and what impacts we make that are good and what impacts we make that are bad. He's not saying that all of our impacts are beneficial. Patrick Moore has a lot of great insight on this subject, and so I asked him to come on to the show to kind of help share some of that insight with you guys and help people start to see things from a perspective. Not all scientists agree with some sort of consensus out there, and I think that the more you listen to different people with doctorate degrees and real PhDs, the more you'll start to hear differences of opinion on this subject, and they're all very educated. I like Patrick Moore's opinion on some things. He and I don't agree on everything, but like I've said before on our channel, that's not what this is about. This is about helping people start to think for themselves, and we're not going to do that unless we hear the whole conversation. So welcome to the show, Patrick Moore.
You got a good visage going there.
Oh, thanks. Well, I started doing just some videos talking about some of this stuff, living out on a ranch. So I've decided to keep the same look and just,
I love it. I love it.
Set up a camera in the workshop.
I have a workshop in all three of my homes. We've been lucky enough to build a house on northern Vancouver Island nearly 50 years ago when we met and had our own sawmill. So we cut all the lumber and built it on a place that was inaccessible by road. So everything had to go in there by boat. And we built it by hand, and it's still there and it's still beautiful. It's a cedar house. And then 20 years later, we bought a place in Baja, a lot back of the beach in Baja, and built a house there. And then we bought a house in Vancouver, which appreciated considerably to the point where we wanted to get out of that place as fast as we could. And so are a lot of other people escaping from the urban environment these days. And I've always had the country environment, both in Winter Harbor and in Cabo Pulmo. So we have 3 homes on the water, basically. And we don't owe a penny on any of them because we've been careful with our money all our lives. And I've had a career as a public speaker that's been pretty good. I get paid well for going in front of 500 people and giving them my thoughts, and I get standing ovations regularly. So I'm proud of that, and I'm really happy to be able to speak to someone who knows a lot about nature, and agriculture and forestry are 2 areas where you learn so much, and it's so ridiculous the urban people, the ideas they have.
Patrick, as you know, I'm very big into regenerative agriculture. I love the holistic viewpoint of managing our land and understanding how nature and ecology works to improve our land and improve our productivity. But over the years, agriculture has taken on a really bad name because agriculture is essentially manipulating our environment or the area that we live in to create products from nature versus allowing nature to create those products on their own. But then to a certain extent, having that ability to create and increase productivity on a smaller amount of a controlled space, which is what agriculture does, it seems like we're actually doing more to protect the environment than to damage it. One of the big discussions, especially at the COP26 climate summit with the UN this year, has been the efficient use of land for food production. Should we be using as much land as we're using right now? What's the most efficient means of generating food supply off of the land that we have?
My thoughts on that are we should leave a lot of these decisions up to farmers, working with environmental people to show them why they're doing what they're doing. Crop rotation, for example. Not many people even understand that. I was driving around here in Comox, which is for Vancouver Island is a fairly large agricultural area because it's almost all mountains, this whole island. And I saw that in the winter, they flooded the fields with water. And I'm going, and that ducks and geese and swans just come by the thousands to these flooded fields. I guess there's, especially dabbling ducks, they can probably find organic stuff down underneath the water because it's not deep, it's just flooded. So the farmer came out of the house while I was parked there one day, and I just said, well, why are you flooding these fields just so that the birds have a habitat here in the winter? He said, no, we're flooding them to kill the potatoes. We don't want any volunteer potatoes coming up because we're planting a different crop there next year. And wow, I never thought of that. That's pretty interesting. And as you know, when you dig potatoes, even if a piece of the potato is left in the soil, it'll turn into a new potato plant next year, which they call volunteers because you didn't want them to be there. And so by flooding the field, they stop that from happening by killing the potatoes before they grow.
Yeah, and yet they were simultaneously supplying a winter habitat for birds. So sometimes when we think about mankind as just being this horrible, horrible thing, just like other species create better environments for other species, sometimes mankind has that same impact.
The urban people have been brainwashed into thinking the people out in the country who are plowing and blasting and drilling and cutting and all the things they're doing are the enemies of nature, right? Because they are destroying nature out there. The only reason we're doing it is so they can live in the city. I mean, we're doing it for them. If you cut off the supply of food going into the supermarkets every day, they'll start dying from the center out. They'll even eat each other. They'll kill each other and eat each other like they do on a lifeboat or a crashed plane. It would not be a pretty scene, this net zero.
I mean, we need food to survive. We're going to have an impact one way or another. It seems like it makes sense to consolidate that impact, to increase productivity on a smaller amount of the playing field, so to speak. Nature kind of thrives off of disruption, doesn't it? I mean, when you look at nature over time, anytime there's something disrupted, as it kind of rebuilds, it changes and it makes it thrive.
It does. It's able to heal itself. Nature has a natural healing ability. If it didn't, it would disappear because there's been so many forest fires and asteroids striking the earth. I mean, really, the species that are here today at the end of a 3.5 billion year evolutionary process are the toughest species that have ever lived on this planet. Not just us, but all of them, because they got here. And we are like less than 1% of the species that have lived on this earth that didn't make it here. The bushes were trimmed quite extensively, the bush of evolution. So we're here. So we're the badassest bunch of species that ever came around the block here. And we lived through everything. And that's what people don't realize is that every living thing on the earth today represents a continuous successful reproduction from the beginning of life.
It's interesting. My wife said to me a little while ago, she's like, man, I never experienced so much death until we moved out onto a farm. And I looked at her and I said, yeah, but you also didn't see so much life. Part of life is death, unfortunately. I mean, it happens, but you see how animals, grow and eventually die, and you see what nature does to itself. You don't see that when you're in the city. So you can't possibly have a very clear understanding of nature and life if you can't get out there and see it in its natural environment and see how it actually works. But it's a continuous, endless circle that, replenishes itself through the cycle of things.
This is the downside of mechanization, Charlie, the fact that almost everybody's in an urban environment now, and they have the majority. It was a time when the majority of people were in the country because it took 70 to 80% of the people just to grow the food, and without mechanization. But that also meant that all the children, and you wanted more of them, not less, because they were free labor as soon as they got to be 6 or 8. And that way they didn't get a decent education. And only a few people in the castle got a good education, where the lord of the manor and his entourage were in a more comfortable situation. But 80% of the people were out in stoop agriculture labor. And so the mechanization has had a huge amount of positive effects. For one thing, it's emancipated women, because they were always second-class citizens in a farming environment. And it also has, for education and that, it means that you don't want big families, you want smaller families. So it's reduced the rate of population growth, which is a timely thing at this point in history. And it's basically made us live twice as long, even more than twice as long as we did in that type of situation. And it's made us wealthy, and it's created technology that we can do amazing things with. But it also means that a majority of the population is being purposefully uneducated about what the people out in the country are for, why they're there, what they're doing. Everything they're doing pretty well is for the city people, providing the concrete, steel, asphalt material, oil, gas, everything, providing everything, including the food, as you well know. So I don't think city people understand that, except for maybe a few. And that will lead to them having the vote in a socialist country. That's what a lot of people are saying anyways. And I'm beginning to see, I'm not quite as much of an optimist on that front as I have been for most of my life, especially given this last 2 years. But the whole climate thing, it goes back 30 years now that they've been trying to destroy us with this climate myth. And if the people with those opinions, like Extinction Rebellion and all of the people who are at COP26 thinking that they're saving the world by destroying it, it's not a very pleasant idea for the future. I hope my little granddaughter doesn't have to deal with a situation like that, and that we wake up sometimes. But I don't know if we will, because it's really a big majority of people now who live in urban environments on the 30th floor of some building, where they're asleep when the food comes in a truck at night and stocks the shelves of the supermarket. And I don't know what's needed to shock them into realizing what the facts are about where things are coming from, and how the people in the country are actually managing these resources in a sustainable way. They don't believe that because they're told it's not.
By creating systems that create more with less, wouldn't you say that the efficiency of certain energy resources and agricultural practices are benefiting the overall environment?
I've flown over Europe, United States, South Asia, India. I've seen a lot of landscapes. And it amazes me how anybody can think that we are destroying the planet when you look down and see that the cities only cover this minuscule amount of area, and even they are full of trees. The cities have more trees in them than the farmland does. Nobody even thinks of that. The farmland is growing our food, But because we can grow 5 times as much food on the same area of land today as we could 100 years ago, and that goes back to your question about the impact, that means we got more land that can be forested. Here's my favorite fact about forests today, is that by about 1750, 1800, Europe had been reduced to less than 10% forest cover. Fossil fuels were not yet providing most of the energy. It was being provided by wood in smelters for iron and copper, in glass works. Every building was heated. Steam engines were coming on and using wood as a fuel. So the forests began to disappear. The first time in the history of human civilization when trees became in short supply. Up until then, they were endless as far as people were concerned. So that's why silviculture began in Central Europe, the science of forestry. And silviculture meant bringing the forest back. So you had set some wood. Today, instead of less than 10% forest cover, the EU, the whole of the European Union, has 43% forest cover. 43. That's nearly half of it. If you look at a map, an aerial photograph of Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, and Finland, and Sweden and Norway, it's like 90% forest. And it's only when you get down further south where it's warm enough to grow grapes and make good wine that you have a lot more area cleared. But even there's a huge amount of forest, over 40%. And the United States forest has grown since 1900 in area, partly because of the intensive agricultural practices that allow us to grow 5 times as much food on the same amount of acres, and also because we moved from draft animals, horses and bullocks and whatever, for plowing the land and all that. It took 25% of all farmland in the United States to provide the food for the draft animals that were used in agriculture for their energy, to pull plows and stuff and drag wagons. So we went to tractors running on fossil fuels. Now that 25% can be turned into food for people and for animals that are being grown for food.
I mean, either way you look at it, we're going to have an impact. Every species on this planet has an impact on its environment.
People say the Amazon is dying. No, 10% of the Amazon has been turned into grassland for grazing. And every once in a while, they have to burn it off because it grows so fast. Everything grows so fast down there. So they say that's the Amazon on fire. The Amazon, I mean, even the people of Brazil, hardly any of them ever go to the Amazon. It's so remote. But I've been there and I've flown across it and been on the river and been in the cities, Manaus and Belém. So I've seen a ton of the Amazon. It's a beautiful, healthy rainforest almost everywhere. There's 90% of it is intact. And yet they say it's dying or being destroyed. And they just use that to hammer people over the head and try to convince them that the earth is coming to an end soon. And it is not. Thinking about the world, to me, it takes you into a space of certain amount of reverence. So as I said earlier, ecology kind of gave me religion because it shows how infinite the relationships are among all the different factors, not just on this earth, but in the universe. But this earth is pretty special because it has life on it, coating practically the whole thing, except where the ice is. Not a lot of living things on ice. That's why I never wondered why I always wondered why people worship ice. But because where there's no ice is where you get stuff growing pretty good. But if you think about it, we still don't know whether there is life on any other place in this universe. We do not have that knowledge. They talk about UFOs all the time and show little green blips on the screen, but they don't have any actual critters. And that makes me really, it spaces me right out to think about that, because this may be the only place in the universe that has life. And we should be very careful about how we nurture it. But we shouldn't buy into fake invisible catastrophes like that the humans are killing the planet, because we are not. We are gardening the planet. In some places, we're leaving it wild, many places. One of the recommendations of the Brundtland Report, Our Common Future, which came out in a UN-backed activity, some really good things came out of it. One of which was that they said 12% of the Earth's surface should be protected as wilderness. And I agree with that, but now they're talking 33 or 50. Okay, what about 100? What are we going to do with the people then? And this is where I come to differ with the Extinction Rebellion idiots gluing themselves to the street. Why would anyone call themselves Extinction Rebellion? I guess because they think the world is going extinct and they are rebelling against it. But the world is obviously not going extinct. The forests are growing. The sea is full of whales partly because we stop them killing 30,000 of them every year. It's alive here on this island called Vancouver Island. It's all alive, the whole thing. And so is almost all the rest of the world.
Patrick, thank you for joining us on As a Man Thinketh. I appreciate your opinions on these things, and I hope that everything that you had to say helps those out there want to research more and understand a little more about our ecology and how all of these things work together, and why there's a lot of fear out there that they don't have to buy into. And in fact, in my opinion, I think that this fear-mongering that's going on is turning people away from caring about our environment. I've always said that people you shouldn't have to scare people into caring about their environment. It's something we should all naturally want to do for our environment. But when you start to throw out misinformation, or you start to throw out things that just aren't scientifically accurate, they can't be scientifically accurate, what it ends up doing is it actually turns people off from caring about the environment. And that's the last thing that anybody wants. And so I appreciate your thoughts. I think that it's important that we look at things from a scientific reality. And then from there, people can decide, how they want to move forward. They don't have to worry as much about how every little thing that they're doing is impacting the environment, but they can start thinking about how they want to treat their environment and make it the most productive use of their footprint.